There's been an interesting trend happening with PlayStation in the last few years. We all know of the iconic and beloved franchises the brand has built up since the original PlayStation. Because before shifting in how they operate these days, Sony used to cater to a wide audience, from casual to hardcore gamers. And that was one reason that always drove me to the PlayStation brand. One moment I'm playing SingStar, the next I'm shooting Hellgas in Killzone, or I'm taking part in the Twisted Metal tournament, and then following that up by hitting the green in Everybody's Golf. The sheer amount of variety PlayStation had made me a fan, and there was always something different to jump into. And you sort of still see that today with games like Astrobot and Returnal, but Sony has been having less games released while focusing more on big budget titles like God of War and The Last of Us. Not to say that any of these games are bad whatsoever, but the PlayStation many of us grew up with isn't the same as it used to be. Some would even say most PlayStation games these days tend to play it safe. But while PlayStation is focusing on those heavy hitters, the rest of their franchises have been collecting dust. And before we go further, if you enjoyed content like this and content not like this, consider liking and subscribing. However, since 2022, PlayStation franchises we never thought we would see again have been making a comeback. First, there was Fantavision. This is a PlayStation 2 launch title most people probably don't know much about, because at least here in North America, Sony decided to give the game a god-awful cover. But when the PlayStation VR2 launched, with it came a sequel called Fantavision 22X. And what was most interesting was that this wasn't being published by Sony. However, in the fine print, Sony did license this to developer and publisher of the game, Cosmomachia. Most people probably didn't think much of it at the time, probably because the game flew under the radar, but this wasn't something Sony typically does. This would only gain more traction when Bandai Namco released Freedom Wars Remastered in early 2025. Finally, this underrated PlayStation Vita game, developed by DIMS and Japan Studio, would get the remaster treatment it's needed for the longest time. Plus, the original developer is hoping it sells enough so a sequel is warranted. Then, to the surprise of everyone, at a Nintendo Direct, a new Everybody's Golf game called Everybody's Golf Hot Shots and Patapon 1 and 2 Replay were announced. And like Freedom Wars Remastered, all three are not only on PlayStation, but also PC and Nintendo Switch. So maybe you're noticing that all of these games are associated with Japan Studio, and 3 of these were licensed to Bandai Namco. So is Bandai Namco our savior? I mean, it sure looks like it. And it makes me wonder, what other iconic Japan Studio games could make a comeback? I talked about Ape Escape in the previous video, and how we've been seeing more of it recently. Astrobot has a whole level dedicated to it. Sony has been re-releasing many Ape Escape games through PlayStation Plus, and then we have Snake vs. Monkey returning in the Metal Gear Solid 3 remake. While the possibilities feel limitless, I'm sure Sony has those few franchises they want for themselves, and somehow I see Ape Escape being one of them. But what about other Japan Studio games? Franchises that Sony will likely never touch again, like Parappa the Rapper. There's no way the Sony of today would make a third game. The game is just too unique for a large audience. But it's such an interesting world of characters and situations that it would be interesting in seeing how a third game would be, let alone what catchy music it would include. How about Doko Demo Isio and the character of Toro? Even Boku no Natsuasumi. Both of these franchises have little to no exposure outside of Japan, and casual games these days is a massive market. And if we're seeing another remaster of Patapon 1 and 2, what's stopping them from doing Loco Roco 1 and 2? Maybe we can finally see a remaster of Puppeteer. If Freedom Wars can have a remaster, so can Puppeteer. This is a game most people didn't play because it was released on the PlayStation 3 mere months before the PlayStation 4 launch with little marketing. And it's a game that deserves more love and a bigger audience. Even Knack 3 could be a possibility. I know people were mixed on that first game, and it became somewhat of a joke and a meme, but Knack 2 improved upon everything and was a really good game. So much so that I wouldn't mind seeing a third game. All of these Japan Studio games and more were never AAA bangers like Sony wanted. Japan Studio excelled at making smaller, unique games that were a bit niche and experimental. These weren't games for everyone, but they did have fans and an audience of some sort. I do wish Sony were the ones bringing back these forgotten games, showing us how proud they are of their large catalog, showing us that they can be the best of everything. They can put out expensive AAA cinematic experiences, while also having these smaller games to fill in those larger gaps. It's what Sony has been lacking to keep players engaged, surprised, and coming back. Exclusives do matter, and they matter when marketing and promotion is on their side. And for these smaller games, it's where Sony has failed in the past. A game like Everybody's Golf isn't going to be as successful as a God of War game, but it does deserve a marketing campaign that lets people know it exists, even if it's not on the same massive level as God of War's promotion. But while Sony has turned their back on a lot of PlayStation's history, especially when Japan Studio's contributions were the backbone of PlayStation, the DNA that helped make it what it is today, and we see that with Team Asobi and Astrobot, having a partner like Bandai Namco resurrect these gems is a wise choice. Bandai Namco is a Japanese company, which is a perfect fit for these Japan Studio games. And Bandai Namco hasn't shied away from that Japanese culture that makes them unique. Plus, they have a variety of games. Big titles like Elden Ring and Tekken, wacky gems like Katamari, anime games like Dragon Ball and Naruto. It's a variety like what PlayStation used to have, and they aren't afraid of experimentation, as we see with Shadow Labyrinth, which is a new, unique take on Pac-Man. So a game like Everybody's Golf Hot Shots and Patapon 1 and 2 Replay have a better chance with Bandai Namco than they would with the Sony of today. Especially when these games are not only on PlayStation, but also PC and especially Nintendo with the Switch and likely the Switch 2. Nintendo's consoles are primarily family friendly. They cater to that casual audience Sony has turned away from. So while it is weird to see Everybody's Golf on Nintendo, it is the best chance this series has in continuing for the future. And for fans like myself, it's just exciting to see a new game in the series. Maybe this is an experiment for Sony to see if these games have an audience. License them out, make some kind of money on them, but don't necessarily deal with any possible failure. So, in a way, I guess it shows that Sony still somewhat cares for these games, even if they aren't slapping their logo onto them. So if this is the future of certain PlayStation games, it's a future I'm excited for. It's been a long time since I've been excited at the reveal of new games. Fantavision 22X and Everybody's Golf Hot Shots caught me completely off guard, and I haven't felt like that in a long time. Now, do I think this licensing will go outside of Japan Studio games? I'm not quite sure. I don't see it happening, at least in the foreseeable future. Something like Killzone or Resistance, I don't easily see Sony letting go of, despite the fact that they are sitting on a goldmine of franchises that they can bring back. But if Sony aren't going to do something with, let's say, a new Wipeout, then license it out to someone who will. It isn't fair that all we've had is a mobile game people didn't want, when the PlayStation 5 can be a great showcase of new music and stunning visuals. But what are your thoughts? What Japan Studio games or forgotten PlayStation games in general would you like to see return? Let us know down in the comments. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, and ring that bell to be notified about future content. And if you enjoyed this, check out my thoughts on Everybody's Golf Hot Shots. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.